Your prepper pantry just got a whole lot tastier. You won't believe this meal could come from a jar. Just add water are the magic words. If you're building a pantry that's ready for anything, don't forget the fajitas. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if it's your first time stopping by. Here, we like to help you level up your prepping and your pantry preparedness. We're always looking for a better way. Meals in a jar are one of my favorite ways to fill my pantry with shelf-stable meals that my family will actually want to eat. Grab a jar off the shelf, just add water, and in no time you'll have a hearty, comforting, and tasty meal that no one will believe came from a mason jar. And you control the ingredients, you know exactly what's in your food because you made it from scratch with love. Talk to anyone who's been through a crisis or disaster and they'll tell you having a warm meal meant everything. But in a stressful situation, it has to be easy. No thinking, no gathering ingredients, just grab a jar. These meals are so good, they aren't just for emergencies. Countless people use these jar meals for busy nights when they just need a quick meal. It keeps you out of the drive-thru, helps keep your emergency food rotated, and is a much better option than hamburger helper or frozen dinners. Today, I'm sharing my recipe for fajitas in a jar, complete with homemade tortillas to wrap them in. Stay tuned for a crazy tortilla hack that makes it so much easier. Let's jump in and get started. All right, so let's get started on the fajitas. I'm going to start by adding my fajita seasoning. Now this is a homemade fajita seasoning, and I'm going to show you in just a little later in the video, how to make this homemade fajita seasoning. You could also use any favorite fajita seasoning packet that you like. This is actually our favorite. It's from Save-A-Lot, but I know not everybody has Save-A-Lot. If you use a prepackaged mix, you may have to use a little bit more because they put some thickening agents and some things in there that aren't going to really contribute to the flavor, but they contribute to the bulk. So you might need more to get an equal flavor. I do have a little bit of a thickening agent in my homemade as well, but not as much as most commercial mixes. I'm going to be adding 1 tablespoon of this homemade fajita seasoning. You might need up to 2 tablespoons if you use a commercial mix. Of course, you can vary all of this according to your own tastes and preferences and your own dietary needs. Some people like their food really highly seasoned and they like things pretty salty. That's me. And some people prefer their food more bland, or they just need to have less salt and less spice and seasoning for their medical needs or their dietary needs. So I'm adding my 1 tablespoon of fajita seasoning into the jar. And next I'm adding my beef fajita strips. Now these are already somewhat seasoned, so we don't need as much seasoning as we might if this was just plain beef strips. So if you have some other beef that you're using, then you might need to adjust the seasoning accordingly. These are kind of hard to measure because they are such nice big strips, which is better than what we usually get in a lot of commercially sold products. You can see these are nice grilled beef strips. So I'm trying to do about a cup, but because they don't really fit down in the cup that well, I'm kind of having to fudge it a little bit, but about a cup of beef strips. I try not to do a whole lot more meat in any one jar recipe than about a cup, because meat's always going to be the most costly part of any meal usually. So to keep the cost down, we try to keep the meat down. You can always bulk up with extra veggies, beans, and things like that. That's a good way to control the cost of your meals. So there's my 1 cup of beef strips. Next, I'm going to be adding some peppers and onions. This is a peppers and onions blend that is sliced, so it's really perfect for something like fajitas. This is going to work wonderfully for this. It's buy 1 product, scoop 1 product. It's perfect. If you have peppers and onions that are separate, you can just mix them together or use, an equivalent amount of both. You can do red or green peppers or both, whatever you have and whatever you like. So here's 1 cup of the peppers and onions. And now I'm going to be adding another half a cup. So 1.5 cups of the peppers and onions. Peppers and onions do tend to shrink a little bit and kind of, almost disappear. Whenever I do fresh fajitas, I can start with a big, huge heaping mound of peppers and onions, and then it cooks down to much, much less than what I started with. So that's one reason that we're doing extra on the peppers and onions. The beef, of course, has already been cooked. It is pre-cooked, and so that's not really going to shrink because it already did its shrinking and its cooking before it was freeze-dried. Fajitas is a super versatile recipe that you can make with any protein: beef, chicken, shrimp, pork. If you wanted a vegetarian version, this would even be good with portobello mushroom slices in place of the meat. Let's do a chicken fajita variation. For the chicken version, I'm going to be using these chicken strips. These are amazing chicken strips. They are so good. They are a little bit big though, so I'm going to have to break them up in order to be able to easily measure them and get them in the jar. Some of them are going to have to be broken up. You can see the size of some of these chicken strips. I mean, this is amazing, and they taste so good. One good thing about the source for this chicken, for the beef that I used today, the peppers and onions, pretty much all of the freeze-dried food that I'm using today, I am getting from a company that only sources their food from the United States of America, which I know that's becoming really important to a lot of people, to find sources of food that are coming from the United States. So that is something that really stands out about these freeze-dried foods. Now I want a cup of the chicken, just like I wanted a cup of the beef. Like I said, I am going to have to break these into smaller pieces just to be able to measure them and get them into my jar. I don't want them really small, just a little bit smaller. Of course, if you are not putting these in a jar, then another thing you could do is just refresh them and then slice them into smaller strips that you wanted. But because I'm putting this in the jar, it's easiest for me to do this first. So there's my cup of chicken. One good thing about this chicken, besides the fact that it's delicious and it is sourced completely from the United States, it means it was raised in the United States, it was freeze-dried in the United States, everything. Another good thing about it though is that actually right now, if you're watching this video in the first day or so after it comes out, this chicken is on sale, buy one, get one free, which is another reason that I wanted to use this, because I know I'm going to be stocking up. I'm going to have all the information on how you can get that chicken, buy one, get one free. There's a coupon code you need and a certain link. So I'm going to put that all down in the video description, and I'll also put a QR code on the screen for those of you who are watching maybe on your television or something and you can't get to the description. You can also send me a text. We have a sale alert service for prepping related, items that go on sale. If you text alert to my number, I'll add you to my list and send you notifications when there's big sales like this. I've got to get my seasoning in there, so I'm going to go ahead and add my tablespoon of seasoning. Now remember, this amount you can adjust up or down just depending on your preferences, your dietary needs, but also the brand of seasoning you're using. This is my homemade seasoning mix. I'm going to show you in a little bit how I put this together. If you're using a commercial one, you might need to use a little bit more because they might use more like thickening agents or things like maltodextrin or something that adds to the bulk without adding to the flavor or the seasoning. So you might need to adjust that depending on what you're using and your own tastes. Next, I'm going to add my peppers and onions to this jar as well. This jar is pretty much just like the other one, except that we use the chicken. And I did break those up more than I did with the beef. If you like smaller pieces in your fajitas, by all means, you can break them up into smaller pieces. Sometimes it's actually easier to eat that way, but we kind of like the long strips. All right, so my cup and another half a cup of these beautiful peppers and onions. Now I can go ahead and add my extra ingredient, whatever I want to add to the top of my jar. So tortilla mix, rice, salsa, whatever I want to add. You could add more meat and more veggies to fill the jar if you wanted. If you did that, I would recommend using a bit more of the seasoning mix. I wanted to keep the servings reasonable though, because if the power's out, you wouldn't want leftovers because you likely couldn't refrigerate them. If you have a bigger family and you need more food, you can just grab 2 jars. You could always use a 1.5 pint jar rather than a quart jar, and this would just about fill it perfectly. I know Ball stopped making that size, so they've been really hard to find for those of us who love them so much. But I have a new source that I'll put down below for anyone who's been looking. But what I'm going to do is give you a few options for filling that extra space in the quart jar. What's in the jar so far is just the filling for fajitas. To make it an actual fajita, we're going to need to wrap the filling in a tortilla. Tortillas are shelf stable for a little while and they're not super perishable. So if you're just using this jar for a quick convenience meal, you might have tortillas in your pantry or your fridge already. But if you're using this jar during an emergency, maybe the power's out and you haven't been able to get to the store, maybe the stores are closed or the shelves are empty. For any number of reasons, you might need to make your own tortillas. So I like to put a mix for tortillas in this empty space. I've got one for making tortillas the traditional way, but I also have another way of making them that I discovered that I think is much easier. It's going to change everything you think about making tortillas, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But a few other options that you can use to fill the space. One option is to fill it with salsa to go on the fajitas. I did a jar like that with salsa. This time I used a salsa that was prepared and then freeze-dried, and it was really, really good. I'm going to be using a salsa that was prepared and then freeze-dried, but I also have a recipe that you can make your own salsa mix, kind of like this, out of just ingredients. So I'll link to that in the description of the video down below, so that if you want to make your own and add it to this, you can. Now, the easiest way I found sometimes to do this, number one, I like to use a fold top sandwich bag, not a zip top, just because the bulk and the sort of rigidity of the zipper can sometimes make it more difficult to fit the bag into the jar. So I like to use this type, and sometimes it's easiest to just put your bag down into the jar like this and then fill it, especially with something like this salsa, rather than trying to fill it and then get the bag into the jar. So I'm going to go ahead and just scoop out some of this freeze-dried salsa and put it into my bag. That is about 3/4 of a cup of salsa. And what I can do now is I can just twist up the top of the bag and tuck it in. Now, what this also does is when I put an oxygen absorber in this jar to put it away for longer term storage, that's going to allow the oxygen absorber to interact with any air that's inside of this baggie, because this baggie isn't zipped shut. It's not sealed super tightly. Another option would be to add a baggie of rice to the top of the jar. Mr. Wicked Prepared doesn't always love eating traditional fajitas in a tortilla, but he loves the flavor. So often I'll put the filling over rice for him, and he likes that much better. So that's another option to fill the jar. Then you wouldn't have to make tortillas if you didn't have them on hand. But if you'd like to do the tortilla mix, I'm going to give you those recipes. Now, just a disclaimer, I am not a very good homemade tortilla maker, which is why I usually buy them. With that being said, these tortillas may not look that great, but they did taste pretty good and they did the job. If you have more experience making tortillas than I do, then I'm sure that you can get these to come out much better than mine. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to start with the recipe for doing tortillas the traditional way. So in this bowl, I'm going to mix this up separately, and then I'm going to put it into the jar. It's just going to be easier that way. So in this bowl, I'm going to be adding 1 cup of self-rising flour. Now, if you don't have self-rising flour, you can make it yourself. I will put the measurements up on the screen for you if you need to make your own. And to this, I'm going to be adding shortening powder. I'm using 2 tablespoons or 1/8 of a cup of the shortening powder. Now, the self-rising flour already has salt in it, so we don't need to add any salt. And I'm just going to use a whisk to blend these ingredients together until it's well blended. Now I'm going to be adding this into our jar. Now, to do this, I'm going to be putting it in a baggie to keep it separate, so that we can cook the tortillas up obviously separately from the filling. I'm going to tuck this baggie down inside of the jar. And this is kind of the easiest way to do it. This is easier than filling the baggie and then trying to fit it down into the jar. I'm just going to start adding our mix. You could use the funnel for this if it makes it easier. I think with this little 1/8 of a cup scoop, I'm going to be able to do this pretty easily without needing the funnel. Tapping that down is going to make everything settle into the crevices of the peppers and everything on the top there, and hopefully allow us to fit this whole bunch of mix in the jar. Just got a little bit left. All right, there we go. Now I can just gather the top of this up, twist it a little bit, and just put it down like this. This is going to be fine because it's going to keep this separate. I'll just remove it carefully when I open the jar. Now, I usually use a 200cc oxygen absorber when I do these meals, and in a quart jar, and then just add the lid on top, and the jar is ready to go on the shelf. You do definitely want to make sure that you label your jars so you know what's in there, and also make sure you have the instructions for fixing this up into a meal somewhere that's not just on your computer, so that if you don't have access to the internet, don't have electricity, whatever the case may be, you can still make this up. To prepare these tortillas, I'm going to carefully remove the bag from the jar. And before I get started, I am going to take a little bit of this mix out and just kind of set it aside, because we might need extra flour for rolling the tortillas, for adjusting them if they get a little bit too sticky with the water. It's always good to have some extra flour when you're working with a dough like that. So if you know you're going to have flour in your house, and you know that you don't need to, if you'll have it if you need it, you don't need to remove some of the mix. But just in case, imagining a scenario that all we have is this jar and some water, I'm trying to do it the way that we would in that case. I'm just going to use the same bowl that I mixed up the mixture in. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back into this bowl. Now I'm going to be mixing this up with hot water, and I'm going to be using about a 1/4 cup. I've got my little 1/4 cup measure here. I think when you're measuring small amounts, it can end up more accurate if you use smaller utensils to measure with. So I love having a couple of these little teeny measuring cups around that measure in tablespoons and up to a 1/4 cup. I'm going to go ahead and add this in. I'm probably not going to add it quite all right off, just in case we don't need it all, because it's always easier to add more than to take it out. I do have the reserved flour, but I'm going to be careful in how I mix this up. And I do think it will take the rest. You could do this in a mixer with a dough hook if you wanted to, but it's really not necessary. And of course, if it was an emergency situation, you wouldn't probably have that option. So it's always good to practice doing it without. Now I'm just going to take to mixing this by hand like this so I can get this all incorporated. I might need to add just a touch more water. Now I'm going to put this on a surface that I'm going to add a little bit of that flour to and just knead it a little bit. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and divide this into about 6 pieces. Try to make them even, although I don't think I did a very good job. Roll them into a ball and just flatten them a little bit, and then I'm going to let these rest. All right, I'm going to let these rest for about 20 minutes or so. You can cover them with a damp cloth so they don't dry out. All right, so these have been resting, so I'm going to go ahead and just try to get them rolled out one at a time. These are not going to be huge tortillas, but we like to have our fajitas slightly on the smaller side. I'm going to get it rolled out as thinly as you can. A resting period is going to help with it being able to spread. It's going to let that flour loosen up a little bit. Now I'm going to stack these, and I'm going to want to have some parchment in between them. All right, so I've got my stack of tortillas here. I'm going to get my pan out and get that heated up. I am going to try using a nonstick pan, so I hopefully don't need any oil or anything to cook it with, just because, if you're making these on your everyday, normal day, you would have oil or butter or something for your pan. But if you were making this in an emergency, or if you had given this away to somebody who needed a meal or something like that, you may not have oil. This pan is actually ceramic coated, so it is nonstick, but it's not the bad kind of nonstick. So I'm going to get my pan heated up so I can start cooking these tortillas. Now I'm going to show you a different way to do tortillas that I think is a game changer, because in my opinion, it's a lot faster and easier, which is especially important during an emergency situation. Now, I didn't come up with this. This is something that I saw someone else doing on the internet, but I thought it was brilliant, so I'm sharing it with you, and I hope that you'll give it a try and see what you think. I was pretty excited about it myself. For these magical tortillas, I'm starting with 1 cup of flour. Now this is a small batch because it's all going to fit in our jar, and we're making it's kind of a small batch meal. Usually a jar meal has about 3 or 4 servings in it in a quart jar. So this is a small batch. So if you wanted to make these tortillas just as tortillas, you could always increase this batch size. So I've got my cup of flour. This is just all-purpose flour. And next I'm adding a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. I'm going to run this through this little strainer right here. It gets out all the clumps so that we don't end up with any unpleasant clumps when we take a bite. I do this all the time with baking soda and baking powder. And next I'm going to add some salt. I'm adding about 1/2 teaspoon, just a little bit scant. Of course, you can cut this down if you need to avoid salt, or if you like your food less salty. And now I'm just going to whisk these ingredients together, these 3 ingredients. Get them pretty well blended. And I'm going to go ahead and put them in my jar. Put this mix in my jar. And once again, just like with the other options, I'm going to use a fold top sandwich baggie. I'm going to go ahead and put my baggie right down inside the jar like this. Press it out to the edges as much as I can. And now I'm just going to go ahead and scoop this mixture into the baggie. shaking and tapping to settle, just like with many other ingredients. All right, so there's our tortilla mix, and I'm just gonna loosely twist that bag and put that down like that. Now we can get this jar ready to go on the shelf with an oxygen absorber and of course a label so we know what meal is in this jar. So I'm gonna start preparing this meal by preparing the tortillas. I'm gonna start by carefully removing the baggie of tortilla mix from the jar and set the jar of filling aside. I'm gonna use this same bowl to mix up my tortilla mix. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this one up with cold water. I'm going to be using about 1/2 cup of water plus 1/3 cup. I'm going to add this in slowly, a little at a time. So this is my 1/2 cup. So I'm putting some of that in. And I'm just going to start whisking this together. And I'm going to add the rest of this 1/2 cup. Now I've got the 1/3 cup to add. And of course, this is going to be a very loose batter. This is going to be a very watery batter. This is not a dough, it is a batter. That's what's going to allow us to pour these tortillas right onto the skillet and cook them that way. All right, I've got my pan on medium-low, and I'm going to go ahead and add a ladle, small ladleful of mix to the skillet and try to spread it out. Now I've got to let this go till it's set and dry on the top. Starting to get some bubbles. Once it starts to bubble, I should be able to get it to lift from the pan. If you have oil on hand, you can use some oil for this, and it would make it easier. But I'm trying to make this emergency friendly, so if we didn't have oil, what would we do? If you don't have a nonstick pan, you'll definitely need to use some oil. All right, once it started to brown on both sides, that is ready to go. Now these will work a little bit better if you can put a little bit of oil in your pan. So if you happen to have oil on hand, but if you don't have it, then it's going to be okay without it as well. You just have to be careful. All right, this one's done. One more option I did want to mention, because I like to give options so that everyone can find the best one for them. You can buy this just add water tortilla mix that's all ready to go. One step, you just buy this, add it to the little baggie in the jar, and attach the appropriate instructions. And there you go. That's just another idea for you. Now, part of the reason I chose to do the tortillas in this pan when it would have been actually easier in a flatter pan is because then I can use the same pan to do the filling. And so we're only going to dirty up one pan. So in an emergency, that would be even more important because you're not going to want to have to do a bunch of extra dishes. So I'm going to go ahead and empty my jar into the pan. And then I'm going to add my cold water. Now I'm going to start by dumping the water into the jar that the meal was in, because there might be some residual powders and seasonings left in there, and I don't want to waste those things. I'm using about 1.25 cups of cold water. It doesn't seem like very much water, and it's not a lot. We really just need enough to hydrate and soften the meat and vegetables. We don't want a lot of extra water because fajitas isn't a super saucy dish. So I'm going to get this hydrated and tender, and then that's really all we need. So it's not a lot of water, because any water that's remaining afterwards, I'll have to boil off. I don't want to drain it because I don't want to lose flavor and nutrition. So I'm just going to get everything so it's kind of touching the water as much as I can. And then I'm going to put a lid on this, and I'm going to let this set. I can already feel this meat starting to become more tender. So I'm going to put a lid on this, and I'm going to let it set for about 10 minutes. That's going to get this started. And then I'm going to apply the heat and simmer it to get the water, to penetrate the rest of the way that it needs to. And then it's going to be pretty much done. And any water that's left, I will, like I said, boil off. If you do have any trouble getting these to fully rehydrate, Usually it's just a matter of extra time, extra water, or heat. So if you have a hard time, you could heat this a little bit now and then let it set that 10 minutes with the heat on, with warm water. Or I guess you could just start out by pouring in warm water, but I usually start with cold water. With some recipes, it's important to start with cold and let it set in cold water. This recipe, it wouldn't matter so much. So I'm going to go ahead and let this set with a lid on it for about 10 minutes. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes. You can see this has absorbed a lot of the water and the meat is starting to get tender. Just going to flip it around a little bit, and then I'm going to put on the heat with the lid, and I'm just going to bring this up to a simmer and let it simmer for about 5 minutes so that the water can continue to absorb into the meat. The vegetables are going to be just fine because they come together really, really quickly. It's really just the meat you have to worry about getting tender in a recipe like this. And the meat is fully cooked. It was freeze-dried, fully cooked, so it really just has to become rehydrated and tender. All right, now that this is simmering, I am just gonna toss it a little bit. I'm mostly gonna leave it alone and let it simmer with the lid on for 5 minutes. Just making sure that the meat is pretty much down into the liquid as much as I can. Okay, it has been 5 minutes. This has been simmering and the meat is tender. So really all I need to do now is just cook off the last remaining bit of this water. If you like your fajitas very saucy, that's a little bit watery. So I would cook it off a little bit anyways. Just turn up the heat and just let this go with no lid. And that's going to cook away the rest of the liquid so that we just have the fajita meat and veggies. Should just take a minute or two. Now we've got beef fajitas ready to go. I'm just going to get our tortillas ready and then we'll serve up some fajitas. And now to fix up the chicken fajitas. I'm just going to dump the fajita mixture into the skillet. And I'm going to add my water. Once again, I'm going to dump my water first into my jar just to rinse out any residual powders that might be stuck in the jar. And I'm going to add my water to the skillet. 1.25 cups of water. I'm just going to get this stirred around, everything moistened, and just leave it to set for 10 to 15 minutes. You can see that that chicken will easily break apart once it gets refreshed. Make sure everything is pretty well down into the liquid, and then I'm going to put a lid on it and set my timer. All right, it's been 10 minutes that this has been sitting. Smells so good. Now I am stirring this very gently because of the chicken, because chicken has a tendency to shred, and I don't want teeny little shreds in my fajitas. I want bigger pieces. So I am going to be pretty careful stirring this. You can see it's already absorbed a lot of the water. I'm going to apply the heat pretty low, just a low simmer, to start to absorb some more of the water and to get that chicken all the way tender all the way through. I am going to do this with the lid on, just to hold all that moisture inside. This is starting to bubble and steam. I'm going to let it go about 5 minutes. Maybe stirring a little bit, but like I said, stirring gently because I don't want to break the chicken all up into shreds. If there are any larger pieces, though, it can help them to get tender all the way through by breaking them up a little bit. All right, this has been going for 5 minutes. It's going a little bit stronger than I wanted it to, but I have tossed it gently a time or two. There's a little bit of water left in here. Let's see if the chicken seems very tender. So at this point, all I need to do is raise up the heat and boil the rest of this water off so that we have our fajitas. Once again, I can break up any pieces that are larger than I want them. That can also help make sure that they're tender all the way through. The key to remember with freeze-dried foods, especially with meats, is if they don't refresh all the way like you wanted them to, there's 3 things they might need: a little more time, a little more water, or a little more heat. So if for some reason this chicken is not refreshed as much as we need it when it's done, I would let it set a little bit longer. There's plenty of water in here for this chicken, and now that the water's hot, it's going to absorb even better. So those are the keys to remember if you don't get something exactly the way you want it when you're working with freeze-dried food. Now this was a total of 1¼ cups of water altogether. I maybe could have gotten away with a little bit less and not had to cook off as much at the end, but that can depend a lot on where you live, how humid it is, your altitude and elevation, all of that kind of stuff. But you can see this didn't take but just a minute to get that water boiled off. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and get ready to serve. All right, I've got a warm tortilla and my fajita mixture, and here it is, ready to dive in. So good. Here they are, 2 beef fajitas and 1 chicken fajita. These were a huge hit with my family. So good. Now let's mix up the salsa, and then I'll show you how to make my homemade fajita seasoning. Now to fix the salsa, we're just going to put the salsa into a bowl. And I'm just going to add cold water just a little bit at a time. And I'm going to stir with each addition until it is the right consistency. So I've got a 1/4 cup here, 4 tablespoons that I'm starting with. And I can always grab more if I need it. Smells pretty good. Now this probably can use a little bit more water, and it is probably going to absorb some as it sits. I don't know if you can see the consistency of this right now, but I think it should be a little bit more juicy. So I put that whole 1/4 cup of water into this 1 cup of salsa mix. You can see once it, gets all hydrated, it kind of shrinks down a little bit because it gets rid of all the air spaces. So I'm going to let this sit because this is going to continue to absorb some liquid. And so I may end up adding some extra water as well. I'm going to go ahead and put a lid on this bowl. Now, if I was going to let this set for very long, I could put it in the refrigerator, but it's not going to sit very long, so I don't need to put it in the fridge. You can see it's pretty thick because it's not really leaving the sides of the bowl as I tip it right on its side. So I'm probably going to end up add a little bit more water to this. All right, I am going to add a little more water to this just to make it more the consistency that we usually have our salsa. I think that's looking pretty good. That looks about like how we would want that. Ready to serve. Now I'm going to show you how to mix up my homemade fajita seasoning. Now you might be wondering what's the difference between fajita seasoning and say a taco seasoning. Well, fajita seasoning is similar to taco seasoning except it's a lot heavier in the citrus notes because it usually has lime in the fajitas. So that's what really differentiates this from a taco seasoning, and I really like the lime flavor that it gives to the fajitas. So if I'm buying commercial mixes, I always make sure that I choose one that has a really heavy touch of that citrus. I'm going to be doing a pretty large batch, so I'm going to mix it up in a bowl, and then I'm going to transfer it into my jar for storage. My first ingredient is going to be chili powder. I want a 1/4 cup of the chili powder, but because this jar has a narrow opening, I am going to use my 1/8 of a cup measure here and just do it twice. That's going to be a little bit easier. And my next ingredient is going to be cornstarch. Now this is going to serve as a thickening agent. Most commercial mixes are going to have some sort of a starchy thickening agent in it, and that's going to help thicken up any juices that come out of the meat and vegetables and turn it into a little bit of a thicker sauce that's going to cling to the meat and vegetables. And in a jar meal like this, when you're using freeze-dried ingredients, you're going to be using water to rehydrate. So it's going to help to make sure that any residual moisture kind of thickens into a nice sauce that's going to coat the ingredients. So I do want to include the thickening agent in my mix. Now, if you choose to leave a thickening agent out, then you're going to want to use a little bit less of the mixture because this is going to add bulk to it without adding flavor. If you have to be low carb or avoid corn for any reason or anything like that, you could use something like arrowroot starch. I'm doing a lot of experimenting lately on a lot of my mixes and doing lower carb versions with different thickeners. So as soon as I have those all perfected, I'll be putting videos out on those. So stay tuned. Now I'm going to pass this through a wire mesh strainer just to avoid any clumps that might be in my cornstarch because I want this mixture to look nice. I want this the seasoning powder to look nice. So I'm going to make sure that I get out any clumps by just passing it through this. You can also do this with the finished mixture at the end. If it looks clumpy at all, I have done that too, pass the whole mixture through a wire mesh strainer just to kind of work out any lumps. The next ingredient is going to be cumin, and I'm using 2 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons of the cumin, which is almost 3 tablespoons. So if you really, really love cumin, you could always just bump that up to 3 tablespoons. I actually do like it a lot, but I like the mix exactly as it is, so I wanted to keep it the way that it was. So there's my 2 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons. The next ingredient is going to be lime juice powder. Now this is lime juice powder that I get from Firehouse Flavors. They're a great company. I love supporting them. They're a small family-owned company. And this is a really good lime juice powder. I have tried using I think it's called True Lime. To me, it doesn't seem like it evenly substitutes in my recipes for lime juice powder. It seems like it's a little bit different measurement. So if you do use a product like that, just play with your measurements a little bit. You might need to use a little bit less or a little bit more. But this is 1/8 of a cup, which is the same as 2 tablespoons of the lime juice powder. And that gives a nice limey flavor to these fajitas. And next I'm adding some salt, and I'm also using 1/8 of a cup or 2 tablespoons of salt. Now this is another place that some people will cut out or cut down if they need to have a low salt diet. And once again, if you do that, you're going to have to probably cut down a little bit on the amount of mix that you put in each batch, because that's going to cut down on the bulk also. Next ingredient is onion powder. Now I am using 4 teaspoons of onion powder. Now of course 1 tablespoon is the same as 3 teaspoons, so I'm going to start with measuring a tablespoon. So I've got 3 teaspoons, 4 teaspoons. And next I'm using garlic powder. And that is going to be the same measurement, 4 teaspoons again. So I'm adding a tablespoon and a teaspoon. I do have one final ingredient that I'm putting in my seasoning. Now, a lot of commercial seasoning mixes don't actually use lime or lime juice in their formulation. They use citric acid to provide that citrus tang. And the mix that we really like, that we buy commercially from the grocery store, the one from Save-A-Lot that we like, that has citric acid in it. And I found that even with the lime juice, it was missing just a little bit of that tanginess that I really like. So I am including citric acid in my recipe. This is not super commonly found in like grocery stores, but I just grabbed this off of Amazon. I have found it in a Polish grocery store before. It's a good ingredient to have. It has uses besides food. You can also use it in a lot of other things as well. But this is just a little bit, goes a long way. Even just a little pinch can add a little bit of tang, like a citrus tang, to your foods. I've used it in things like potato salad and all sorts of things in the past. A little goes a long way, so I am just adding a teaspoon of the citric acid to my fajita seasoning, and it really kind of gave it that extra boost of tang that I was really looking for. So you could leave this out if you don't want to purchase this, but it does add a little bit extra to the mixture that I really enjoy. Now the next step is just to whisk all of these ingredients together until they're well blended, and then put it into the jar. Now, like I mentioned, if this has any clumps in it, more than what I want to see, I may pass it again through the wire mesh strainer before I put it in the jar. It's actually looking pretty good. I may not have to do that. Smells so, so good. All right, this is all ready to go into a jar for storage. You just want to keep it into an airtight container. A mason jar would work really well. I like to use little clamp jars for seasoning mixes like that. I just think it looks nice, but anything you want to keep this in that's going to be airtight and protect it is going to work fine. These are a couple of the different kinds of jars that I've used. I think they're cute. They're inexpensive. I've picked them up at Walmart. They have a nice, good, airtight clamp seal. And they look really nice on the shelf. I'll put links to these down in the description below the video, just like everything else that I've shown and used today. So you can check and see if your Walmart has these, and if not, you can probably order them. I know I ordered some of these, and the first time they were wrapped pretty well, but one of them came broken, but they replaced it for me easily. So today I'm going to use this jar for this seasoning mix. I like that it has a nice wide mouth, so it will be easy to measure out the seasoning. This is going to make quite a bit, probably about 16 tablespoon size batches. So in the jar meals I made today, I used a tablespoon of mix. Those are equivalent to about a half a pound of meat recipe. And so if you're doing a full pound of meat, you'd probably want to use at least 2 tablespoons, which would actually be one of these scoops. And of course, you can adjust that to your taste. If you want your food a little bit more strongly seasoned, you can use more. And if you like it a little bit less strongly seasoned, you can use less. You could definitely use a canning funnel or any kind of funnel when you're getting this in here, but with this wide mouth, it hasn't seemed too necessary. Although I did make a little bit of a mess, but there is our fajita seasoning all ready to go on the shelf. I'm just gonna put a label on this and it'll be good to go. There it is. Doesn't that look super cute? Now this does make a pretty big batch. I do have the measurements to make a smaller batch. So I'll put those, where can I put those? I'll put those in my meal in a jar group. I'll put a link for that down in the video description so you can go check that out and get the measurements for the smaller batch if that's what you want to make. I hope you and your family enjoy this meal as much as mine does. Meals in a jar are great to do in batches and prepare multiple meals all at once. I always recommend though that you try any recipe once, the first time, and fix it up and let your family actually taste it. Make sure that you like it because we all have different tastes. Just because my family loves something doesn't mean that yours will too. Maybe you just need to make a few tweaks, more or less seasoning, swap out an ingredient or two, or change the water amounts for preparation maybe, because that can sometimes vary depending on where you live. Once you've got the recipe just the way you like it, then make it up in bulk and stock your shelves with multiple meals. It's almost just as easy to make 6 or 10 of the same meal as it is to make one when you get everything ready and do it assembly line style. It can even be a fun activity to do with your kids, with a group of friends. Get together and do a jar meal swap. That's a really fun thing to do with friends, family, or neighbors. If you want some more meal in a jar recipes, I've got a whole collection on our website and I'm always adding more. I'll link that down below, as well as my Meal in a Jar Facebook group where you can join a whole community of jar meal loving people. Find recipes, see reviews of different meals, ask questions, and make friends. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a pepper emoji down in the comments and check out my Meal in a Jar playlist next for some more recipes I think you'll love. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.